This video is going to be about measurement with the English system, okay? So the English system should be familiar to you. So one of the things we're going to talk about is the conversion factors, and you have to memorize them. I'm not going to tell you on a test that a foot is 12 inches or that a ton weighs 2,000 pounds. So you have to do them, okay? So you have to start learning all these conversions about the English system because America still uses the English system. It's the only civilized country in the world, probably, that still uses the English system, okay? But since you have to teach it, you have to know it. All right, like last time, I'm going to share my screen and share a PowerPoint with you and show you some things, okay? Let's see. All right, so we're talking about the English system. Now, I don't mean to insult your intelligence, but some of us have a little trouble with a ruler sometimes. And again, it's because nobody ever sat down and had you actually measure with a ruler very often. So you may have forgotten. All right, so let me show you a picture of a ruler. I want to show you something. All right, first of all, I want you to understand when you're measuring with a ruler, often 0 is not at the end of the ruler. Now, sometimes it is. So the first thing you've got to teach a child is to find 0. Because if you're going to measure a segment with a ruler, you need to make sure that the one end point is on 0. Okay. Now, the other thing is this. I want you to count how many little tick marks there are between the whole numbers. So look, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So from 0 to 1 is divided into 16 congruent little pieces. If you count between 1 and 2, there's 16 pieces and 16 pieces, okay? So when we're measuring in 16ths. So 16th is going to be the denominator, all right? Now, after you measure in 16ths, then you're going to simplify that answer. That's why you learn to do fractions in math for teachers. All right. So if you had a segment that went here to right there, and I told you on a test to take your ruler and measure the segment, you'd have to find endpoint and make sure it lines up with 0. And then you would count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. So that segment would be 14 16ths. Now remember what we talked about, the bottom tells you how many equally sized pieces make a whole. And see, 16 equally sized pieces make one, they make a whole. And you have 14 of those. Now, you couldn't leave it this way because it's not simplified. I'd expect you to change that to 7/8. That's what I would want. Okay? Well, suppose the segment went from here all the way to there instead. All right, let's make the endpoint right there. Well, now what would happen is it would be a 1. So I have a whole. And then this little piece right here would be part of a whole. It'd be 1, 2, 3, 4. And then remember how many equally sized pieces make a whole when you're using an English ruler? 16. But again, you couldn't leave it 1 4/16. I would expect you to change that to 1 1/4. Now we'll talk about why when I get to class in person, but I do want you to notice the reason a lot of rulers have different lengths on these tick marks is to help you reduce them. The longest ones are the whole numbers. The next longest are the halves. So see, that's a half, that's a half. The next longest are fourths. So that's 1/4, 2/4 or a half, and 3/4. Then the next longest ones are 8ths. And the smallest ones are 16ths. But most kids have a hard time doing that. So for them, I just have them always measured in 16ths and then reduce it. Okay, now, if you're the kindergarten teacher, though, remember what we talked about. If you're the kindergarten teacher, you're not going to measure with standard units. You're not going to use a ruler. You might measure in paper clips, or you might measure using pencils, how many pencils long or something, okay? But when you first start measuring in like first and second grade, a lot of times they'll just be measuring in whole numbers. And then once they get good at measuring in whole numbers, then they'll make a measure more accurately in like half inches and then fourth inches. So as they get older, they expect more and more and more accuracy. But remember, they're not doing fractions. All right. So that's why it gets a little sticky when you're measuring with a ruler. Okay. That's why a lot of times in elementary school, they'll just go with like halves until they get to like about fourth grade when they start hitting fractions. All right. Now, remember, let's talk about this. All right. Now, most of this you probably know. When you're measuring length in the English system, these are the things you have to memorize for me. All right, you should know that 1 foot's the same as 12 inches, that a yard is 3 feet, and that a mile is 5,280 feet. Now, if you don't remember this last one, you can figure it out because you could change feet, miles to feet, and then change feet to yards. Okay, but these first 3 you have to memorize, and most people it's just easier to memorize all 4 because I'm not going to give them to you on your second test. You have to know them. Now, we talked about this in class, but think about it. If something was, let's get where I can write. If something was 3 feet. So first of all, do you know why that length of measurement is called a foot? All right, this is how arbitrary it is. Hundreds of years ago, there was no standard unit of length. So you couldn't tell somebody a measurement and everybody know exactly what you were talking about. So in England, in the UK, they decided they were going to have a length that everybody had to use. And so they literally measured the king's foot. And that's how long his foot was. So if that dude did have like a longer foot or a shorter foot, the foot we use would be a different length. That's how arbitrary it is. Okay. But if you had something that's a foot, if you suddenly decided that you wanted instead to measure it by paper clips, wouldn't it take more paper clips than it would feet? If you were measuring in pencils, if it took 3 pencils, wouldn't it take more than 3 paper clips to measure that same length? So think about it. When you're going from a bigger unit to a smaller unit, you're going to multiply because you need more of them. Now, if something was 10, we'll put PC for paper clips. If you measured a segment and it was 10 paper clips long, if I took the paper clips away and gave you like pencils, and you measured them in new pencils, wouldn't it take way fewer than 10 brand new pencils? Well, the number is going to shrink because you need more of them because they're smaller. So when you're going from a big unit to a small unit, you multiply because you're going to need more of them. When you trade your smaller unit for bigger units to measure with, you won't need as many, so you divide. Now, the other thing I need you to kind of get straight in your head is this. When we go to work some in a minute, you don't go left to right. You go from the number to the blank. All right. Now, what am I talking about? Here's what I'm talking about. Okay. Now, you need to stop the video and take this, to write all this in your notes. All right. So you stop the video and you write down the English conversion factors and you write down these 3 statements in your notes. When you've got all 3 of these conversion factors, these red statements and that blue statement in your notes, then I want you to go ahead to the next slide. Okay, because you need this beside you when we're working the next slide. All right, look right here. Here's what I'm going to have you do on your second test. You're going to have to change from one unit to another unit. So the first thing you're going to need to do is decide if you're going big to small. I'm going to put B to S. All right. Remember, when you're going big to small, you're going to multiply. And when you go small to big, remember, you're going to divide. All right. Nobody would know what in the world if they just did this video, would they? All right, you're going to divide. Now, look what we said. Now, the blue numbers are the answers. So those, of course, would not be there. All right, but I want you to have them for your notes. Okay. Now, where's your number? It would just say 2 feet is blank inches. So that 24 wouldn't be there, it would just be a blank. So your number's here. So you're going from feet to inches. Okay. So if I'm going feet to inches, am I going big to small or small to big? Isn't a foot bigger than an inch? So big to small, I would know to multiply. So I'd write down my times. Then I've got to know those conversion factors back over here. How many inches are in a foot? 12. So you would take that 2 and multiply by 12 and your answer would be 24. All right, look here, my number's right here. My blank is right there. So I'm going from the number to the blank. So this time I'm going from feet to miles. So if am I going from a bigger unit to a smaller unit, or a smaller unit to a bigger unit? Aren't feet smaller than miles? Aren't they shorter than miles? So I'd be going small to big. So I would know to write down divided by. Then I've got to know how many feet are in a mile. So if I don't have 5,280 memorized, see, I'm stuck. Then I would take my calculator and say this number divided by that number, but you've got to give me an exact number. So this was a pretty one because we're starting simple, but if not, you're going to have to by hand divide this number by that number with log division. If it doesn't terminate, if it doesn't give you a exact decimal, you'd have to go back and do the division by hand and give me a mixed number that's reduced. It's yucky. So the English system is just not fun. It's not good. Okay. Now look at this one. Now I'm not going to, you don't go left to right. My number's over here, my blank's over there. So I'm going from my number to my blank. So I'm not going yards to inches. I'm going inches to yards. So small to big or big to small. Do you see I'm going from small to big? And see, small to big, I divide. And I've got to know how many inches are in a yard. Now, I didn't tell you how many inches were in a yard. So what if you don't know that there are 36 inches in a yard? Well, if you don't know that, you've got to do what's called a hidden problem. You've got to go with what you do know. Maybe you know how to change inches to feet, and then you could change feet to yards. So inches to feet would be small to big, so I would divide. And I know there are 12 inches in a foot, so I could take 48 and divide by 12 and get 4. So 48 inches is 4 feet. Then I could start with that 4 feet, so I could start with this answer and then change 4 feet to yards. Well, again, I'm still going small to big, so I'm still dividing. And there are 3 feet in a yard, and 4 divided by 3 is 1 1/3. If you put 1.3 or 1.33, I'm going to count it wrong. I do not want a rounded decimal. You can give me a decimal if it's exact like that one. If it's not exact, then you've got to give me a fraction or a mixed number in simplified form. But see, if I knew that there were 36 inches in a yard, I could just do this problem in one step. So I could get 1 1/3 in one step. Otherwise, I've got to do 2 things to get the same final answer of 1 1/3. All right. Now look at this one. I'm going from my number to my blank. Excuse me. So I'm going yards to feet. That's big to small. So big to small, I multiply. There are 3 feet in a yard. So when you say 8 2/10 times 3, you get 24 6/10. All right, look, here's my number and there's my blank. So I'm not going left to right. I'm going from miles to yards. So is that big to small or small to big? All right, do you see that that's a big to small? So I'm going to multiply. So that's how I know to write down multiplication. So 2 2/3 times, and again, if you know how many yards are in a mile, 1,760, you're ready to go. If you don't know that, you're going to have to do a two-step problem like you would do on number 4. Now this is back to Math 210. You got to change that to an improper fraction. There are 3 equally sized pieces in a whole. You have 2 wholes, so that's 6 pieces, plus these 2 extra pieces. So you've got 8 equally sized pieces. It takes 3 equally sized pieces to make a whole. How do you make whole numbers a fraction? Don't you put them over 1? So you could say 8 times this number and 3 times this number and then divide, and this is the final answer that I got. So that's the number that I would write down in that blank back over there. Okay? So remember, you've got to know that big to small you multiply and small to big you divide. All right? So that's when I am measuring length. Now, sometimes we measure things besides length. What if instead I'm measuring weight in the English system? Well, you've got to know that 1 pound is 16 ounces and 1 ton is 2,000 pounds. So you got to memorize those 2 facts. Now, this part's going to be the same. Big to small, you're still going to multiply. Small to big, you're still going to divide. Okay? So I'm going pounds to ounces. So is that big to small or small to big? And a pound bigger, heavier than an ounce. So big to small, I multiply. So I'd write down my times. Now I have to know that there's 16 ounces in a pound or I'm stuck. So by hand or calculator, I'm going to say 5 8/10 times 16 and get that answer and write it in the blank. Now remember, I'm not going left to right, I'm going number to blank. So I'm going number to blank. So this time I'm going pounds to tons. Okay, so pounds to tons is small to big, so I'm going to divide, and I've got to know that there are 2,000 pounds in a ton. So again, when you take 8,652 and divide by 2,000, you get this exact decimal. So if the decimal is exact, you can use it. If it's not, then you would have to do it by hand and give me an improper fraction or a mixed number. Okay, now look at this one. I know that tons are bigger than ounces. So big to small, I know to multiply, but I don't know how many ounces are in a ton. I didn't memorize that. So I'm going to have to do 2 problems to figure out this one problem. I know how to change tons to pounds. So that's what I'm going to do, number to blank. So tons are bigger than pounds, so big to small you multiply. I know there are 2,000 pounds in a ton. Well, 4 times 2,000 is 8,000. So now I've changed 4 tons to 8,000 pounds. Then I start with that answer. Now I change the 8,000 pounds to ounces. I need to put the ounce down here. Okay. And again, I'm going number to blank, so pounds to ounces. That's going to be small. That's going to be big to small, so I multiply. I know there's 16 pounds in an ounce. So when I say 8,000 times 16, I got 128,000. So if you know the conversion from this word to this word, it takes 1 step. If you don't know the conversion factor from this word to this word, then you may have to do more than 1 problem to get the answer. You've got to go from what you know to what you don't know. Okay. All right. Now let's go talk about capacity, how much something holds. Now, this is the English system for capacity. We measure things in like cups and pints and quarts and gallons. Now, this is a little confusing also. A fluid ounce is not the same thing as an ounce in weight. They are 2 different things. Okay, so this one is how heavy something is. All right, this one is how much space something takes up. All right, so do you understand that a fluid ounce of something thick would weigh more than a fluid ounce of something thin? Like a fluid ounce of honey would weigh more than a fluid ounce of water. Okay, so don't just put ounce, make sure you put fluid ounce. So this is a weight, this is how much space something has on the inside, how much it holds. All right, and again, you've got to memorize these things if you don't know them. Same thing, big to small you multiply and small to big you divide. So I'm going from number to blank, so cup to fluid ounce. That's a bigger to a smaller, so that's how I do to multiply, so I wrote down the times. I've memorized that there are 8 fluid ounces in a cup, so I know to multiply by 8. And 2 5/10 times 8 gives me 20 fluid ounces. So maybe you're drinking a 20-ounce water bottle. Okay, look at this one. I'm going from number to blank. So that's quart to gallon. Aren't quarts smaller than gallons? So small to big, I divide. And I've got to know that there are 4 quarts in a gallon. So that's why I divided by 4, and 15 divided by 4 is this exact decimal. Or you could put 3 3/4 as a mixed number. Now, look at this one. This one's going to take more work. Quart to cup. I know that's big to small, so I know that I'm going to multiply, but see, I don't know how many cups are in a quart. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to have to change 2 quarts to pints. Okay, that hidden problem. I know how to go from cups to pint, from pints to cups, or quarts to pints. So I'm going to go from quarts to pints. All right, so big to small. Remember what you do, you multiply. All right, how many pints are in a quart? 2. So 2 times 2 is 4. So I do know that 2 quarts is 4 pints. Now I'm going to start with the 4 pints. And I'm going to go from that down to cups. All right, again, number to blank. So pints to cups is going to be big to small, so I multiply. How many cups are in a pint? There are 2 cups in a pint. So 4 times 2 is 8. So I started with quarts and I ended with cups. So my answer right here is 8. But I had to do 2 problems instead of 1 problem because I didn't know how many cups were in a quart. Now, let me show you something that's helpful sometimes. All right. And a student showed me this one time and I thought it was really a smart thing to use. All right, it's a memory trick that she showed me. Here's what she did. She wrote down a big G for gallon. Now remember, what's a little smaller than a gallon? A quart. How many quarts are in a gallon? 4. So she put 4 Q's inside of her G to remind her that 4 quarts are inside of 1 gallon. Now, what's smaller than a quart is a pint. How many pints are in a quart? Do you remember that there are 2? So she put 2 P's in this Q. There are 2 pints in a quart. There are 2 pints in this quart. There are 2 pints in this quart, and there are 2 pints in this quart. Now, why did she do that? Because now she can very quickly see that there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 pints, P's inside of a whole gallon. Now think about it. What if I had known that a minute ago? If I had known a minute ago, I could have just multiplied by 8 right here if I'd known that there were 8 cups in a quart or 8 pints in a gallon. So go back and look. She knew how many, there were 2 cups in a pint. So there are 2 cups in this pint. You see that there are 2 cups in this pint. So how many cups would be in a quart? Do you see there would be 4 cups in a quart? How many cups in the whole gallon? 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16. So this helped her see how to do a 2-step problem sometimes as a 1-step problem. So go back to this one. Quart to cup, we need to multiply. How many cups are in a quart? How many cups, how many C's are in a quart? Q. 1, 2, 3, 4. So if I had known that a minute ago, I could have just said times 4 and gotten 8 in one step instead of doing it in 2 steps like we did a minute ago. Now, the only problem is this. Once you get this, you know, there are 8 ounces in a cup, but she really couldn't fit 8 little O's in a C. It was too tiny. But this is a good memory trick sometimes to help you remember the conversions that are back on this. So remember, the same thing is true no matter what you're measuring. Okay, so let me kind of stop sharing the screen for a second. All right, so you've got to be able to measure length, you've got to be able to measure weight, and you've got to be able to measure capacity in the English system. So that's a lot of things you have to memorize. How many inches in a foot, how many feet in a yard, how many feet in a mile, how many ounces in a pound, how many pounds in a ton, how many fluid ounces in a cup, how many cups in a pint, how many pints in a quart, how many quarts in a gallon. Now, I'm sorry, but that is the way it is because America still uses the English system. Drives me crazy. The metric system is infinitely better, as you will see in the next video. But you're going to teach kids both because in this country, that's what we do. We do both. All right. But regardless of what you're doing, make sure you don't always go left to right. You go from number to blank. Big to small, you multiply. Small to big, you divide. So there's going to be a worksheet on Moodle, and I want you to work the top half of the worksheet. That's just the English system. After you work the top half of the worksheet, then go watch the metric system video and do the bottom half. See you later.